I now have the pleasure of introducing someone who I've seen in action both here in Minnesota and also in Uganda. I can assure you this person's charisma, compassion, and commitment translates regardless of what land he is in. Please join me in welcoming American Refugee Committee CEO Daniel Wordsworth to the stage.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. This is our big night of the year. And don't worry, as soon as Abraham Leno finished speaking, my wife and daughter simultaneously turned to me and said, "Don't sing." And it was like serious. Don't sing. And so don't worry, I'm not going to sing, but you did a great job, Abe. Well done. And thanks. He did do a good job. I've just returned from a very troubling region around the world. I was in the Kutupalong refugee camp, and that's in Bangladesh, and it's where the Rohingya refugees are staying. It's now the home to over 600,000 refugees. Just on August 24, there were 20,000 people living in that settlement, and in the last 3 months, it's grown to over 600,000. Yeah? And I was lucky because I was there with this group called Love Army. There are these like social media influencers. Yep. So there's a guy like Jerome Jar who's like the world's first Snapchat celebrity. Like, I don't know how you become, Skip, how do you become like a Snapchat celebrity? It lasts like 5 seconds. In like 5 seconds. But he was like the first one. And we had a guy called DJ Snake. So I got to hang out with a guy called DJ Snake. Are you familiar with DJ Snake? He did like 6 of Lady Gaga's songs. He's like with the Biebs, right? He's like, Marty, is he a happening guy? He's a pretty happening guy. Actually, apparently we're like trending right now. All this social media stuff, we're trending on the Minneapolis like social media thing. So like that's twice I've been close to trendy. Yep. My daughter's like, no. So the Love Army folks, they managed to raise $4 million. Ayan, you did an awesome job for the Somali famine. And now they're working to really shine a light on what's happening with the Rohingyans. It's really an appalling situation. So if you're looking up anything, you want to look up Love Army for the Rohingya, or Love Army for Rohingya. And they're doing a GoFundMe, so you can join in with that. So, the American Refugee Committee is a humanitarian organization. We work, at the end of these, people always say, Daniel, you didn't say who ARC was, right? So I've literally got it written here, say who we are. So we work on the front line of human need around the world. We serve, as you heard earlier, over 3 million refugees, people who are caught up in conflict. We serve 1.5 million patients every year through our medical facilities in places like Darfur. You got to meet Jibril. He works in one of those camps in the Sudan. We work in South Sudan providing healthcare. We provide, as you saw, almost 8 billion liters of clean water every year in places in refugee camps in Uganda, but also on the streets of Mogadishu. Last year, with our partner Questscope, we rehabilitated 70,000 homes inside of Syria. We put kids into school in Pakistan, but also inside of Jordan. And we deliver food right now, actually in Myanmar, to the Rohingyans. So thank you. That's our job. We love doing it. I will say this, for all of this, I am so indebted and I am so proud of the over 2,000 ARC staff around the world that do this. You got to meet a few of them tonight. They really are remarkable people, and they actually do. Many of them risk their lives every day to do this. I also do want to give a big thank you to Questscope and ORAM, our partners that help make this happen too. So thank you guys. Thanks. You can meet a bunch of our staff. They're like floating around down here, and make sure you go up and say hi. They're awesome from different spots. So perhaps you've been watching things like Yemen. You've been watching what happens with the Rohingya refugees. For me personally, just in the last 2 months, I've visited camps in Rwanda. I've been in Uganda. I've been just in Bangladesh. I only got back a day ago. That's what this stunned look is for. And I was actually down visiting folks in Northeast Houston in Texas. And these are folks like in the northeast of Houston, and affected by the hurricane. So I got to hang out with those folks too. So sometimes when you look around the world, human suffering can seem like this forbidding dark ocean, and then riding on top of it with surging waves, dark roiling clouds, and there's like a sea of human hands that are desperately waving and seeking help. In the face of this, it seems to be a sensible wish to just stand and throw a life preserver. Then to kind of helplessly watch, feeling vaguely guilty. And not just the guilt of the fact that we're alive and surviving, but there's a kind of also guilt at the desire to stay safe yourself. This is a necessary response, and it's a necessary response in lessening our own empathy and the desire or the fear to become emotionally involved in these kinds of things. It seems to be an ocean without bottom. And the last thing you want to do is leap in, right? But here's what we know at the ARC. It's what I know after many years of working in this kind of place, in these kind of places. Truth is, it's not really like that. It's not really a dark ocean. Actually, what it's like is more like a dark veil, like a dark veil. And this is one that you actually can reach out and you can just move aside, and if you want to, you can pass through. But this passing through, it requires an act of belief. And the advantage that we have, and I think this is, you hear me say this many times when I'm up here, it's one of the gifts that we feel that we can offer to you, is the fact that we have been on the other side of that curtain. I've been there just like Monday and Tuesday of this week. And that we can emerge and then talk to you about it. We can tell you that actually it's okay over there. That actually what you find over there are places and people of immense bravery, this most wonderful diversity, it will take your breath away, and surprising commonality. So what I wanted to do tonight, you're going to get a slideshow. Is that good, Mary? I wanted to show you some of these things from behind the curtain, and I would like you to meet some of the people that are experiencing these things. Your connection to them will not be through language, it will not be through country, it will not be through religion, it won't be anything outward. Your connection to them instead will be something inward, and it is the shared experience of being a human being. So I want to start first with Somalia. Your home is your place in the world, right? For some, it's a symbol of your role as a protector. For others, it's a symbol of their role as the lover and nurturer. If you're a child, this is the place where you literally became you. Your home is fundamentally a place of pride. I have this. I built this. I am at home here. I am a father and a husband, so my experience is really colored by those things. So I imagine taking my family here. I would feel shame. I shouldn't feel shame. I may have walked days to be here. I may have literally crossed deserts and rivers and jungles. I may have carried my child for days, like this poor woman we heard tonight from Gibraltar. And this is the end of my journey. This is where I would put my child to sleep at night. When I see these places, I see a mother or a father with shoulders slumping, a person who feels diminished. But this shouldn't be. So instead, we are trying to create places like these ones. These are homes, and this is the same place as where you saw those humpies. It's where we're building them. Homes in communities, a place that brings a smile to the face as you approach. We want to see a father or mother drop their shoulders, not in shame, but in relief. I am home now. Here I'm going to give you another example, once again heavily filtered through my world. I was in Eastern Congo, a place that has seen 15 years of conflict with appalling human rights abuses. It's a very hard place to bring up children. And I was visiting a clinic, this one actually. You see Abraham there? And Tad? They're in the room as you saw tonight, Abraham and Tad. So when I first visited this clinic, a mother was waiting outside and she was holding her child who was obviously very sick. And after I went inside, this is taken inside there, I saw they had no medication. And I met the nurse that was sitting in there, and she had this desperate, please help me look on her face. After the visit, I found myself imagining what was about to happen. This mother was about to take her sick child in. This is the sick child that she'd been nursing herself for some days, desperately hoping it would get better, but it hasn't. So instead getting worse. And so she's walked some miles to come to this clinic. She would wait anxiously, and she was waiting anxiously on a little bench that was under a tree. She would then go in and she would sit on, there's a bench just near where that shelf is. And she would wait for her child to be seen. And then the nurse would sit down with her. And the nurse would say, yes, your child is very sick, but I have no medication. There's nothing I can do. Now, what really affects me when I think about that, is I want you to imagine for a second you're the mother and you're sitting in the bench. You've made this walk, and it's the last walk. You're walking to save your child, yes? And so at that moment, you realize that all the things that you fear are true, and yet there is nothing that you can do. But you also know that the moment you stand up from that bench, it's over. Whatever hope that you had carried on that journey, it only lived while you sat. And the moment you stood, it's gone. This really shouldn't be. So we worked with these same mothers and we came up with something better in this area. It looks more like this. It looks actually like this. That's it. We love this. You know, this is, again, these clinics are in Eastern Congo where that mother lives. They open every single morning. They always have drugs. They are wonderfully clean, and they are places where people get better, and they are staffed by dedicated Congolese nurses and doctors. Thanks. And I get it, I'm telling you some very big things, right? Repairing clinics and fixing houses. So Sarah, who's also in this room, she works for ARC, she had an important experience. She was sitting with our team in a large refugee camp inside of Uganda. This camp is on the Uganda-Tanzania border and it has about 85,000 people that live there. This camp started in 1958. It's one of the world's oldest refugee camps. Has people from 12 different nationalities living there, all largely forgotten from wars and famines and crises of 5 decades. She was sitting with our team in that camp, and that team delivers clean water every day and does things like providing protection, and they had a similar look as that nurse in that clinic, a look of desperation. They are confronted with this kind of need on a daily basis, and they were struggling to do enough in response. And so she asked them what could be done. And after the morning of sort of brainstorming, the only ideas they could come up with cost about $1 million apiece. But we didn't have $1 million. So Sarah reached into her wallet, pulled it out, and she had $500. She held it up in front of this team and said, I don't have $1 million, but I have $500. So let's do something right now with this. And the team came up with dozens of ideas. So from that sprang our Changemaker 365 idea. Each day of this year, we have asked this question: what can we do with $500 right now? And all the way from the Umpiam Mai refugee camp in Thailand to a Goodwill store in St. Paul, and all the way down to that hurricane survivor in Houston, we've been rolling this and trying this out. So I want to give you an example of an answer. From that very same refugee camp where those folks were living in Uganda, we were asked to handle protection services. So this includes providing protection to women that are experiencing violence in the home. So while we call this a refugee settlement, it has 85,000 people living in it, so it's more like a city. And so they have shelters for women who are fleeing violence, much like we have here. When we took over this home, it looked like this. I can hardly speak for the families and the women in particular, so I'll let the pictures do the talking. We thought it shouldn't be like that. Instead, it should be like this. You know how long it took to make that? That took 5 days, $500 a day. If this one feels welcoming, it feels more like someone is being gently held, not housed. This is a great use of $2,500. And here's my last story. This one's from the world's newest camp, one of the world's newest camps. It's a place called Bidi Bidi in Uganda. It's in the northern part of the country, and it's for folks that are fleeing issues that are happening inside of South Sudan, and it has 270,000 people living in it. This is Zone 5. We're responsible for Zone 5 of that camp, providing protection and other support services to those residents. Just out of curiosity, it takes, to drive, it takes 1 hour to cross Zone 5 by itself. We are providing post-trauma counseling, working to prevent violence in the camp, and we help run the reception center. This is the place, the reception center is the place where every new refugee comes in off their journey and they meet you in the camp. So we were still in the early days of the crisis. The camp had materialized very quickly from nothing. Thousands were arriving each day. Humanitarian groups were still mobilizing. And one day, one of our team members watched something unfold in that reception center. And her name is actually Sonia, and she was up on stage last year if you were here. What she saw was one man had walked for 10 days to get to Bidi Bidi. He'd found nothing to eat on the way. And when he arrived in the reception center, he stood in line to receive food. When he got to the front of the food line, the people that were serving asked him to step aside because he didn't have a plate. And so they asked him, move aside. Now he was momentarily frozen. He was afraid that if he left to try to find a plate that he would lose his place in line and that he'd have no food. So what he did is he took off the gumboot that he'd been walking and he cut it in half with a knife and he presented the gumboot to the person delivering food and said, here, please fill this. So Sonia saw this problem, their solution. We have created a dish library. These dishes are numbered and they're lent out to those who can't find a dish to use. They keep the dish, the cups and utensils until they have their own set. Do you know how much this one cost? I've given you a big hint. This is $500. It is true that no one should have to use an old boot for food, especially after you've watched your village be destroyed, after you've seen your home being taken, and after you've walked for 10 days. But more than that, no human should have to go through that moment that he had in that line, those few seconds where he had to consciously let go of his dignity, and he had to willingly choose shame. Especially after you've watched your village destroyed, your home taken, and you've walked 10 days. You know, when we started all of these things, houses in Somalia, clinics in Congo, protective housing in Uganda, we used to say things like, we want to give dignity back to these people. But actually, what we've realized is not really that. This is not our job. It's not our place to give people dignity. We have each of us been born as wondrous human beings. We come into the world holding it. We are each responsible for our own dignity. We choose each day what type of person we will be, whether we will be kind, generous, and open, or not. Dignity cannot be given. But here's a truth. Dignity can be taken away. One of the most challenging things for me about living at this moment, not just in America, but in the world, is what I say to my daughter, Bella. It's, or maybe even more than what I say, it's how I choose to live my life. It's how I choose on a daily basis to respond to all of the things that we see. It is true. There are many forces in the world that seek to rob people of all that it is to be a human being, to be a person. Daily we make people eat from shoes. We make a mother give up on her child. We leave a person abandoned and alone. It is true that there are many things and also people that seek to rob a person of dignity. But it is also true that there is a greater number of people who are willing to join together to help that person take their dignity back. Thank you. That's, you may wonder why we have like this giant thank you. Yeah. So who are these people? They are people like RSP architects that designed that little house that you saw. Yeah. Actually, they're people like Dunn Brothers, right, that help us. They're folks like Abraham Leno, who was a refugee himself that went through this struggle to become an engineer, and then what did he do with that? He went back into the refugee camp. He runs those clinics, by the way, those ones you saw in Congo. Good on you, Abe. It's also people like the Devics. I think I saw you, Ajay and Teresa. They're the ones that support Changemakers and help rehabilitate that house that you saw in Uganda. And it's also folks like Sonia, who works on protection, who came up with the idea of the plates. You saw her here last year. Each one of these people believes that a remarkable life should not end simply because a person becomes a refugee. So here is the good news. There is a host of people that believe there is simple human justice in the ability to create a life of meaning and dignity. Perhaps it is the most basic of human justice. And the really good news is that this host of people are not a host of heavenly saints. They are a host of everyday people. But here's something else that may surprise you. And don't worry, I'm getting to the end. Last year at the gala, we were joined by Poor. He was a refugee Olympian Remember Paul? He speaks of our time at the gala as a real high point in his life. This is a guy who went to the Olympics and marched in the opening ceremony, and yet he describes this night 1 year ago as one of his all-time high points. Do you know what made it amazing to him? He said for all the years that he had sat in a refugee camp in Kenya, he had thought he was completely forgotten. He had no idea that there were people in other parts of the world that actually cared about him. And he sat here. You're about to go through the auction, right? He sat here during that auction last year. And he sat here with mouth open. He watched people eagerly and excitedly bid to invest in people that they had never met in their life. He, as a refugee, sat in this room and watched you people excitedly engage and want to make a difference for folks that you will never meet, like Abraham's guy. So the news is, many of these refugees, 23 million, many of them think they are forgotten. And yet, here we all are. So do you mind if I do something? I want to send something to Paul, and I want to take it with me. Wherever I go in these camps, I take my iPad and I show folks pictures. So I'm going to get my daughter Bella. I want to do a selfie. Okay? I'm not real good at this one, but I want to take a selfie with me and all of you. Okay? We'll see if we can do it. Hold on. Everybody wave. Okay. Actually, Bella, you got to come up. I don't think it worked. Take the picture, sweetie. This is my Bella. Can you take a picture of all of us? No, you stand there and take a picture of all. So we do it again. Can everybody wave? She knows what she's doing. Okay, good. Thanks. So I'm going to send that to Paul, and I will take that with me. Here are all these folks in Minneapolis that care. So what do I tell my daughter? That one. It's what many of you show her on a daily basis. You must build your own life of dignity. You can push aside the curtain. You can choose to accept that it's our shared humanity that binds us together. You can choose to believe that everyday people can make a difference. And then you can choose to join in. Because, and this is a very curious truth, a good life is built more through giving than taking. Thank you.